can read both.
Read it out. Are you moderating this, or are you just here for?
No, I'm just here because I'm alone.
Okay, well, this is a nice one. I guess we're here at the Remembering Jim Shooter panel, so we're going to remember Jim with ridiculous stories and whatever we can think of. I'll start. Actually, we must introduce ourselves first, huh? We start that in introducing ourselves.
Oh, yeah, that's what I do. Well, so we wait for Alan. Alan can take it.
We'll introduce Alan the Abstention.
Right.
So I'm Rick Leonardi. I signed on with Marvel in 1980, and Jim Shooter was the guy who hired me. So, the beginning of my story, right there.
All right.
My name is Mike Gold. I am the one on this panel who never worked with or for Jim Shooter. Friends since some sort of strange poker game in 1976 at Louise's house. That's my take.
And Alan Milgrom, who will be sitting here and will be soon, was an editor at DC, then an editor at Marvel, freelancer, inker for many years, occasional penciler, and worked with and for Jim.
And he's the funniest man in comics.
He's the funniest man in comics. My sister-in-law has attested to this, so it must be true.
She's the arbiter?
She's the arbiter.
Oh,
Not my family, anyway. So, my name is Louise Simonson. I worked at Marvel for a number of years, before, during, and after Jim Shooter, and have a few Shooter stories.
And I'm Louise Simonson, and I signed on as an editor at Marvel in 1980.
Yep.
Yeah, and worked as I was editor and a writer for Marvel off and on. And there comes Alan, yay!
I couldn't, in good conscience, leave. So.
Did you wash your hands?
We're grateful.
None of your damn business.
See? The funniest man in comics.
I washed it, but I didn't get a chance to dry it.
So, I will say, in addition to Louise's story about Louise, that Jim actually hired her away from Warren Comics, where she was the editor for 4 years. And he's the guy who hired her to come work at Marvel at the beginning of 1980. And she was an editor for 4 years, and then quit in '83 after Jim Shooter read her proposal for Power Pack, which he was going to do like a one-issue story of. And he read it and he said, all right, this is now a monthly book, and it's late.
There's an editor for you.
Boy, no kidding. So,
We all just say that out of habit. It's just, it comes at the end of every sentence.
Yep.
You're late.
You're late.
Yeah.
That's always true.
Well, Jim hired me also. And I have been working at DC. DC gave me an editorial position, and it lasted almost exactly 1 year to the day. Do I need this?
Sure, or not.
Yes, you do.
And I thought it would be interesting to see what life was like on the other side of that desk, the editorial desk. So I took the job, and I was enjoying it. I was having a good time. And at the end of the year, they got the word from corporate that they had to slash 40% of everything. It was the DC explosion, and then we were doing a bunch of new titles and a bunch of new backup features, and then they must have gotten a sales report that was scary, and so they canceled everything new, and they fired half the staff, probably half, 40% of the freelancers. And Larry Hamm and I were among the most recent hires, so we were, out the door first. And then Shooter called me up and said, "Hey Al, I think we got something for you." And I went, "Oh good, I'm back to freelancing, great." But no, he offered me an editorial job at Marvel, so I said, I don't know if I learned everything I wanted to in this 1 year that I was here, so sure. And I took the job. And he was putting together an editorial staff. And he, whatever you may think of me, Larry Hamm is a great editor, Louise is a great editor. I guess he hired, okay, I'm on it.
Okay, and Cindy, who was his assistant.
Yes.
said you are such a fabulous editor. She said she learned so much from you.
Oh, she tells you that too?
She does.
I thought she was just telling me that.
She
so I
tells
feel
the world that.
Oh, well, that's nice to hear. She's so sweet. She was very distracting though, because she was cute.
Oh, she was beautiful.
Oh, she was really a beautiful girl. Anyway, so I'm sitting there at my desk going, you know, back to the page, back to the page. But very talented
That's
person.
it.
So, but Jim put together a very good, strong editorial staff. I don't know exactly when in the process he got Grunwald and Salacrup.
It's before me.
Before you, so probably maybe before me as well. And
Danny.
Fingeroth, yeah, when did he come in?
Well, he was my assistant.
Oh,
when I first.
all right.
You know, it's funny, I just got a text from Danny, just this morning, saying, tell the people in Baltimore they should invite me.
Okay, you know that, if you guys would invite Danny, that would be great. So next year, you're all responsible.
He's got books to sell, for God's sakes.
Really. So when did you start working at Wyoming?
Me, I believe.
Was he there when you started? He was already there.
Oh yeah, we were.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
So
You were
they're in the
like
way, so-
diagonally across the hall from you, and I had a little office.
Yes,
with no
I had a
windows.
really big office.
Yes, you did.
But also, mostly what I heard there was they were doing demolition across the street. So there, you know, every 5 minutes, boom, and the whole office would shake. And they were dynamiting the bedrock to build a new giant skyscraper. And it was a process. You look out the window and they work, and then they put this big, like mesh chainmail blanket over a large chunk of earth, bedrock, I guess. And then there'd be an explosion. And it would, you know, I guess that kept all the rocks from flying across the street and hitting me in the head, which was good. So
They cared about that?
they did. They knew about me even then. You know, he can't sustain any more brain damage. So, but Jim was tasked with. There had been a string of editors in chief, and yes, and it was every top writer got a shot at the job and very quickly realized what a horrible job this is. You know? You figured, oh, what could be more fun? Stan Lee, you know, Roy Thomas. How long did Roy do it for?
I don't know.
I don't know, but I want to list, at one point, and there was the editor-in-chief's office, and there was a list on it, and the names of the editor-in-chiefs. So it was like Stan Lee,
Crossed out.
Roy Thomas, crossed out. I don't know how it ordered, but then Larry, Lennon
Marvel
Marvel,
Wolfman.
Jerry Conway. One of them was there twice, because he quit and then come back and been edited for like the editor-in-chief. No, and then Archie was the last one before Shooter.
Well, because Archie was pissed that I think it was Conway got the job before he did. Because he had seniority, and Archie
And that is
was
sort of experience.
a great editor
Yes, he was.
and a spectacular writer
Yep.
and a heck of a editor. But and then he got the job, and I think Archie did it for a year, maybe.
A year or two. And then
Okay.
Shooter was his assistant.
Okay,
And so he turned it over to Shooter when he quit being
Right.
editor-in-chief.
right.
That's how Jim became editor.
That's how Jim got the job, and Jim got the job.
Say what?
That's
Well, he went there afterwards. They started Epic after he quit being editor-in-chief.
Right.
He got that
Did
going.
they create Epic specifically?
For Archie?
Well,
Or maybe Archie.
for the
created-
freelancers, because they wanted to have creator-owned stuff.
Yeah.
And they were kind of inspired by heavy metal.
Yes.
Yeah, they didn't need to compete with heavy metal, but they needed to compete with heavy metal.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
anyway, bottom line was, Shooter ended up with the job. And they tasked him with getting the books on schedule, because what happened with all these rotating editors-in-chief is these guys would be editor-in-chief for a finite period of time, and then they'd say, God, this is a thankless job. And then they would leave the position, but they would say, you know what though, I will continue to write and edit my own books.
That's
So you had all these, it was like an oligarchy or something, I guess. You know, they had all these guys who were responsible for writing all these books, and one water short, and I'm the one who asked for it.
You can take mine because my thumbs are too weak to hold.
Now I've got all the water. I want your hand. Will it improve my drawing? So anyway.
I've got that.
You'll have to open
started.
that one for
Oh,
me.
that-
No, you can go here.
No, I haven't been able to. I keep slipping on it.
Oh, yeah.
So you drink that one.
I got it.
Oh, thank you, sir. You can have that one if you want.
No, you're too good a friend for me to steal your last bottle of water. So these guys were writing and allegedly editing their own books. However many books they were each doing.
How well did that work out, Alan?
You know, Louise, I'm glad you asked. Because it didn't work out well at all.
Okay, please tell us why. This is a two-pack to ourselves.
I think you guys are
I'm a sock puppet over here now. Yeah, it didn't work because these guys were not good at cracking the whip on themselves. So stuff, you know, if things got late, they didn't have somebody to call them up and say, come on, because they were responsible for their own stuff. And so gradually, over time, books kept missing deadlines and missing shipping and missing all the, you know, this is the stuff you guys don't know about, but you had to get the stuff to the engraver on time so you could make the plates to print the books. And if they were late, then it didn't get to the printers in time. And the printers ran their presses 24 hours a day, I think, you know, probably 7 days a week.
4/7.
Yeah. And so they had you slotted for this amount of press time, and if the stuff wasn't there, they would charge you. They'd charge you all kinds of late fees, overtime, double time, who knows?
You'd get fined if it wasn't there to be printed on time.
Also, they game printed stuff, so that if your book was late, it's quite possible that a book that was on time could now be delayed.
It was like the airlines. Your flight's late, the flight that's supposed to follow your flight is now late. You know, so yeah, it was a domino thing.
So,
Anyway,
it was money.
and, well, of course. So the powers that be said, we need you to get everything on schedule. These guys are missing deadlines, books are missing shipping. We're slotting in reprints of issues that were published like a year and a half ago, because, you know, Marvel hadn't been around doing the new stuff for that long yet. And Shooter said, I can do it. He says, but I need an editorial staff. And they went, the hell you say? Because all these other, you know, editors-in-chief, it was a one-man show, because that was the model. Stan Lee wrote most of the books and edited all the books. And it was only 8 books at the time when Marvel started coming back into the superhero. Anyway, that's history. So they hired Shooter, and Shooter says, I need an editorial staff. I cannot possibly do this by myself. And I can't have all these writers editing their own stuff.
Yep.
So he hired the people we mentioned previously, and he was very candid, Jim. I'll give him this. I happen to like Jim. I got along great with Jim. There are people who didn't. But when he first came in and he was getting the books on time, he was great. He said, look, hire any new writers and artists that are, you know, even borderline professional. You know, if the penciler's not great, get him an inker to improve the stuff. You know, work with if you're the editors now, work with the writers, make the stories better. And he had a very clever idea. He had them do books. You know, Marvel always had the crossovers constantly. You know, so he would have an issue that had Spider-Man, but guest starring, I don't know, Captain America and Wolverine. And then if some book became late, you could use it as an issue of Spider-Man, an issue of Cap, an issue of Wolverine, or an issue of Team Up, or in a pinch you could call it the Avengers because Cap was in it, you know. And it didn't fit into the continuity, but at least it was original and it was new. And over the course of time, he got every book back on schedule. And that's when the trouble started.
Well, he also relieved the various writer-editors of their command positions as editors of their own book. And that pissed off several of those guys because they were used to doing it themselves and being in charge of their own destinies in that sense.
They warned them, these books will never be late now.
They were costing the company money.
Yeah.
And so Jim stopped allowing writer-editors, or most of the writers, not artists, I think, writer-editors to
Yeah, well, there were no
exist.
artists.
And several of the writer-editors went off to
That
DC.
didn't work out in DC.
But several of them went off to DC. That's when they went to DC. No, they don't think it became writer-editors at DC either, but they were annoyed at Marvel and Jim, so that. But Jim did get the books back on time, quit costing Marvel the money it had cost him to have the late books, and that was really Jim's challenge in the beginning. So,
You know, every editor has a de facto circle of talent that with whom they are close. It just works out that way. It's not necessarily like, oh, you suck, you're my friend, so you're going to get work. No, not at all. And Jim, to his circle, which was a pretty damn large circle, was fiercely loyal to those guys. He got Steve Ditko paid, and got Steve Ditko his artwork, not the old stuff because Steve wouldn't take it, but that's Steve. And
I would take it.
I'm surprised that you didn't have the opportunity.
Yeah.
But, damn. And most of those folks were fiercely loyal to him, as well they should be, because friendship is friendship. My role with Jim is exactly the opposite. I hired Jim while he was at Marvel. I guess he shouldn't have done this, but I was still putting together the programming for the Chicago Comic-Con as an act of love. And I was putting together the program book, and I thought, you know who should do the cover of this book? Jim Shooter. Because Jim was an artist. Very few people know that because he got his reputation being those other writing things. But he did. He drew this beautiful street shot of Metropolis. You look up and there's Superman flying by. And it was absolutely beautiful. And we printed it, and people at the convention went nuts. It's like, I didn't know you could draw. And yeah, I'm not sure you can tell a story, but boy, he could draw. He was a good artist. And at this convention, 2 years ago, well, 2 or 3 years ago, the last time I ever saw Jim, he comes up to me and says, you remember that cover? And I said, oh yeah, sure. He says, I don't think I ever got the art back for that. And I was thinking, the first thing I did was the math, because this was like 40X years ago. You know, the guy who actually printed the thing had died. I couldn't even call him up. You know, do you have the art? You know, nope. A little later on, after I commissioned that, Jim was between publishing startups. It was post-Marvel. And I took him out to lunch on DC's dime because the best reason to work for DC in those days was the expense account. And by far, Archie and I took great advantage of that. We weren't supposed to take each other out for lunch. We did.
So never starve if you work for DC Comics.
Well, that's
their motto.
That's not true any longer, but
Well,
yes. Yes,
You'll never get out of your parents' basement if you work for DC.
That's right. But we had this great lunch, and then I come back to the office and to write up my little expense account form. And I said, Jim Shooter, and I put down the restaurant, and I said, why? Why did you take this guy out? And I said, new talent. Now I had this office all the way at the opposite end of where the publisher, Mr. Levitz, had his office. And Paul approved all the expense accounts. So he takes my expense account form, walks all the way down the corridor to the opposite end, says, "That is funny." And walks all the way back. And I thought, yeah, I thought it was funny too. Wow. Nothing came of that because, I guess Jim started another publishing operation over him. It did, something did happen after a few years, and he briefly came back to write the Legion. But, once you've had a taste of that freedom.
Speaking of that, I assume everybody may know this by now, but Jim originally started writing professional comic books at the age of 13 or 14.
He was 13 when he wrote the first story. He was 14 when it was published.
There you go.
So pick your date.
Come on up, join the panel. Yeah, and so that is unheard of. The only other person that age I think who was working professionally in comics was Joe Kubert in the 40s. And the standards weren't that demanding then. But Jim loved,
Well, because Joe worked for Will Eisner for free at first.
oh, did he?
Yeah, that's according
It's a
to
bad
Joe.
business plan? Yeah.
Well, but he got into the business.
He did.
And in those days, getting into the business for a 14-year-old, 13-year-old,
Yeah.
that's wonderful.
And he
But
got
there were a few others.
Yeah, but he did get better.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So Jim didn't know how to write a script. He was 13, right? So
No,
didn't
but
know-
he sent in
But he-
story ideas to Mort Weisinger.
Yeah, but he did it by drawing them. I actually have a
He
picture
would-
of one of the ones.
he would-
His script was a fully
Thumbnail.
thumbnail drawing.
Yes.
It was-
So when Mike said he didn't know if Jim could tell a story because he did this one really nice drawing, he could tell a story and he was not bad at it. His art never developed. He won some art contest, he told me. I just found this out last year. That I think would have given him a scholarship to an art school or something, but his family was poor enough that he couldn't afford to quit working for DC Comics to go to the art school, so he never developed the art as much as he might have liked. Who knows if he would have gotten
He did a
good.
commission for me 2 years ago. It
Yeah.
was really terrific.
Was it? Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I've seen him do sketches at shows, and they're not bad. They're not great, but they're not terrible. And again, if he'd given himself a chance to develop, who knows? And once in a while, because Jim wanted to be instructional. He wanted to tell all the freelancers how to write a good story, how to draw a good story, how to ink a good story. I think he left the letterers alone, but and then the coloring also. And he had very strong theories about all those fields. And some of them were good ideas, and some of them were less good ideas. And the trouble with Jim is he would tell you the right way to do stuff, and then if you went off and did it, because he was a guy, he was complicated, he had great qualities and some less great qualities, and if you didn't do it the way he had instructed you, which meant you had to be able to use his brain in your brain, and if you could try as hard as you could to do what he wanted, and sometimes you would still fall short, and then he thought he's purposely ignoring you.
Sometimes people were.
And sometimes people were. That is true also.
Yeah.
So it became a very difficult, because I would go in, I could talk to Jim. I don't know why. Ralph Macchio, who was an editor at Marvel for many, many years, he said, Al, I don't know how you can go in and like fool with him.
Because you weren't afraid of him.
I wasn't afraid of him, and Jim apparently, because I had the 1 year editing at DC first, I guess felt like, oh, well, this guy's actually had experience, so I I didn't create him. I'm just trying to get him, over from the dark side.
Oh, that's an interesting idea. It never occurred to me.
I think,
Yeah.
You're an editor too.
Yeah.
Well, Weezy,
I could always argue with him.
yeah, well, you can sweet talk anybody into or out of anything.
That works.
You do.
What can I say?
It's logic, but nice as possible.
It's also magic.
It's magic.
You use what you've got.
Yeah. So, so you know, I mean, I would go in there. I once had a discussion with him. He didn't like. I don't want to be, you know, carrying him down, but he didn't like somebody's work on a title. I don't remember. Maybe it was Micronauts. And
It was.
was it? Okay. And and I said, you know, and it was somebody who was very popular. It wasn't Michael Goldman, but it was one of the many people who followed him on that book. And they said, he said, you know, he's not doing it right, Al. And I said, how so? He said, well, he's not, you know, following these rules, and that I told him how to do it, but he's not doing it. I said, you know, Jim, you're a fan of the movies, sure. You know, there's guys who are great actors, and then there's guys who are like matinee idols. You know, I think I cited, who's the British actor, Sir Laurence Olivier. I said he's considered to be a great, great actor. And then you got John Wayne, and he may not be a great actor, but he's got this great presence on the screen, and his movies make a ton of money, and he's super popular. And he said, see, I said, so there are artists like that. They're going to be popular with the fans, and the stuff will sell, and there's going to be people who, you know, who maybe are great, better storytellers, but maybe they're not as popular because their art isn't as flashy, it doesn't have the interesting style, you know, that the fans are always looking for. And he said, Al, if you could take that guy and teach, you know, if you could take John Wayne and teach him how to act, then now you've got something. Yeah. So I said, well, and I said, okay, but you can't always do that. But he refused. No, they're all teachable, you know. So I said, well, I guess that's an optimistic way of looking at it.
Well, I would say he had a view of a lot of the artists, and for a time, his office was right next to Ann DeCente's, and his was at Park Avenue South. And there were heat registers that went along the wall, and they went through the wall, vents through the wall. And so occasionally in Ann's office, you could hear Jim. Sound would come through it, which is how I know. I don't know who told me this, but people have a bit. My name came up, and Jim's assessment at the time, Walt Simonson, another big gun who can't be aimed. And I thought, when I die, I want that on my tombstone.
I want no more deadlines.
No more deadlines. The last deadline.
I made this one.
I once used that line to terrify Mike Grell, and I'm doing a Grell panel next. Mike was late, which was odd, and I called him up and said, why do you think they called them dead lines?
Fair enough.
So
I'm puzzled now, see, as a relative latecomer to all this. Shooter was strict, and I think the assessment of him as someone who's interested in the instructional side is accurate. I think he did have principles in mind, particularly principles of storytelling that he wanted to imbue every new hire with. And I think maybe in later years he got a little hidebound about it. Maybe. I didn't see it. But
Hidebound.
a little
yes.
hidebound.
yes.
But I think he was rowing against the tide too, of people coming in who knew nothing about storytelling and didn't give a shit about it. To the point where books were becoming, functionally unreadable. And I think that trend continues today. The thing that I'd like to push back though, or at least examine, is that this is the same guy, this doctrinaire guy that we're describing here, is the same guy who turned Bill Sienkiewicz loose, who gave Todd McFarlane his head. This guy is a kind of a protean figure. I mean, at the same time he's being described as dictatorial, he's nevertheless really innovative. And he brought a lot of things into the business that, you know, we're still profiting from today.
Well, excuse me one second. In fact, when you brought your samples into the office, second time was it? Well, I don't know. Rick brought his samples.
TLDR. So, fall of '79. I wrote something. I penciled it. I inked it. I blew it down from its original huge size using. This is days before Kinko, so I had to use photomechanical transfer, which is expensive. And I sent that down as my submission, and eventually Shooter got back to me saying, you know, if you want to be a penciler, which is what your cover letter says, you should send us pencils, because we have no way of evaluating the submission otherwise. In fact, that's the letter he should have written, but he didn't. What he did instead was he sent the whole package over to Archie Goodwin, where it languished on his desk, because they thought the writing was quirky enough that maybe I'd fit in over at Epic. Archie doesn't answer his mail, so there the matter lay until I went down, banged on the door. So, you don't have to answer me, but you do have to give me my shit back. So he said, "Oh, you, go home, do some pencils, and come back," which I did a month later.
Okay.
And so that's
where you ended up in my office?
exactly.
Okay, so I looked at Rick's pencil samples, and they were good, but they didn't look even remotely like Marvel Comics. And to my mind at the time, I thought they looked like underground comics, I think. I don't know if I told you that, but that's certainly what was going through my head. And, you know, we chatted for a little while, and I maybe tried to give you some direction, but, you know, the stuff was good enough that I said, you know, don't leave. And I trotted the samples down to Shooter's office, and I said, "Jim, I got this guy. He's really pretty good, but you know, it's not really what we do, but he could get there." And Jim looked at it, and to his credit, he said, "Oh no, this guy's great. I don't want him leaving here without a script." I said, "Oh, okay." You know, so apparently my instincts were almost good enough. And Jim, I don't think you left with the script, but we got you one shortly thereafter. Was it that Hulk annual?
Thor 303.
Oh, Thor 303. Okay.
Doug Muncher, however you say it.
I think part of the response to Jim, I mean, Alan said, you know, you love him or hate him sort of a thing. He can be a very imposing presence because he was a very imposing presence.
Yes.
He was, what, 6'7".
6'7".
He had chiseled features, usually dressed very nicely in suits and stuff, which in comics, that alone can be very intimidating. And
He kind of looked like he was drawn by Bernie Wrightson.
on steroids. On steroids. You know, so I could see Jim's working relationship with some people as an intimidating experience.
Yeah. Oh.
He would say one thing, and you would not think of that as advice. You would think of that as an order from
Threat.
God.
Oh. Okay.
You know, so and I understand that. That wasn't his technique. It's who he was, and that encompassed all the good, all the good.
I was going to say, we talked about Jim's rules, or his teaching methods and stuff like that. One of my favorite things, which I didn't always do, but he did not like characters standing on the bottom panel border.
Oh.
Like on the line. You'd have a line. Well, you'd have just a line. You'd have a straight on shot. But using the lines that were the floor plane, but with no depth to it. You just had the line.
Right.
And he referred to that as the objectification of the panel border.
Because he was standing on it.
Because he was standing on it.
Got it.
And he didn't like it. I would do it anyway sometimes. Sometimes design-wise, this worked really well. But the other one story I'll tell really quick, as quick as I can, which is when I was doing Thor, Jim was beginning to, well, he would read, I was reading all the make-readies by then or not, he might have been, because he eventually was reading all the May credits and would write notes in the edge. The May credits were very stapled at all, just
Yeah, they were
unbound.
stapled and
But no
they
covers,
had no
right?
covers, which is.
Right, and he would read those, all the ones, and this is when I always talk about more and more books. He'd read them all, he had the notes in the corners. This is crap, this is good.
Arg is my favorite.
Arg. This wasn't very helpful.
No.
But-
It was clear.
Yeah. So he was going over a lot of stuff. And when I was doing Thor, I got to Thor 351. It was the middle of the climax with the Battle of Surtur, for those of you who are familiar with it. And if you're not, it doesn't matter. And it was a big picture of Thor walking toward the viewer with his hammer in his hand. And I had that Jack Kirby beat up look. Jack would give guys these little lines, like cuts. He didn't really beat the crap out of him in the early maybe he did, but and his costume was torn, his cape was torn. So he was advancing on the Rainbow Bridge. It was cropped just below the knees. And Mark Bruno was my editor. And Mark was a pretty interior guy. And he was a good editor for me. And for a lot of people, he put me on Thor. And Jim saw the drawing, the cover, and he said, he's got to be more handsome. Got to give this to John Romita, have him redraw the head.
Oh, God.
More handsome. And, you know, he's been beat up already, so I don't know how handsome he's going to be beat up, but Thor's a guy.
Thor just gets better and better.
Better looking
before he
every
gets
time.
beat up, yeah.
So Mark got a photostat of the draw, full-size photostat of the drawing. It was a black and white photograph, really, on plain on satin paper, not gloss, and gave it to John. I found out later John redrew the head, straightened out a little bit, cleaned out some of the cuts, and straightened out his jaw to look like a John Romita jaw, and turned it back in. And Mark, in the meantime, did not tell me any of this.
Because he was smart.
Well, I didn't find out, in any case. So he had it redone, and then the next day, Jim was out of the office. So Mark took the original unretouched cover, had Tom DeFalco sign off on it. Tom was the editor-in-chief assistant, second in command, who was in command the day Jim wasn't there. So he signed off on it. Comic went out, got printed, and a few weeks later, Jim came back into Mark's office. Mark never told me. Came back into Mark's office and threw the comic down and says, "See, isn't this better?" So Mark told me later, and really, I'm not sure what would have happened. It's likely I would have walked off the book. I'd have stomped off the, well, yes, I would have been really mad. I would have stomped off the book and I would have stopped doing Thor at 351 instead of 382. So, and what's really cool now is I not only have the original drawing of that cover, I have the stat. So I got that from Mark. But
Did you wait till he issued that?
I'm sure we can put it back on the cover.
With a good cover.
With a good cover, that's right. And you know, I look at it now, it doesn't look that different to me. That's what's really funny, but it looks a little different. But I'm sure I would look at it and go, what the hell is this going on here?
Yeah.
But,
You have John Romita Sr. original.
I do have John. And apparently, John was not happy about redrawing it.
Uh-huh.
He didn't like the idea of redrawing it, didn't want to, but that was really it was the art director,
That was his job.
which also meant correcting stuff. So it was his job.
Whether it needed correcting or not.
That's right. So he did his job, and that was fine.
Yeah.
And I never held it against John. I thought it was really funny. But I'm glad the cover went out the way it did. You know.
Yep. Anyway, but I don't mean to be tearing Jim down. He was. What I always said was once the books were all on time again. And the reason I said that's when it got dangerous is because then we had time. You know, we were just rushing and hurrying up and producing a lot of stuff just to slide in where necessary. And once everything was caught up, then he kind of wanted everything to be perfect. And what is it they say? Perfection is the enemy of the good. You ever hear that?
But I believe it.
Never heard that.
Oh, I've heard it a few times, and now I'm using it. So now it'll catch on. But you could do a good comic book, and you could spend another 6 months or a year trying to make it perfect. And is it gonna make it this much better? And is anybody going to notice the difference? Maybe Jim Shooter.
And it might make it worse.
And
It's
might-
stiffer and more boring as you work to
Yes.
perfect it.
Yes, exactly.
Go ahead.
No, I got it.
I was just going to say one thing about Jim that I as an editor-in-chief, there's a lot more discussion to have. I'm probably not going to have it here. But one of the things that Jim offered as editor-in-chief, that a lot of others didn't, including some of the ones that followed him, was he had a vision. Whether it was a good vision or a bad vision or an accurate vision or a not so accurate, he had a real vision of what the comics ought to be. And he worked to try and make that happen. And that gave him a direction. It wasn't always a direction that we wanted to go. It wasn't always a direction you wanted to go in your own comic. But it gave him guidance, and it helped guide the company for a long time. And there were things that did happen. There was at least one year where Marvel made more money than they had ever made during Jim's tenure. Or, well, at all. It was during Jim's tenure.
Yeah.
And Jim was more or less called to carpet because whoever invents the figures for how much money we're going to make next year, the accountants or whatever those people are, he didn't make as much money as those guys said they were going to make.
Right.
And so he was called on the carpet.
They would predict, what are we going to make next year?
And Wheezy's thought was, they shouldn't be giving Jim a hard time. They should be firing the projection guys. Because they're the guys. This guy made more money than we've ever made, and it's not enough because of these imaginary numbers.
How frustrating
So
would that be?
those guys should be out of the job.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that.
That it remains a very common practice where, they have to have these projections, and then, if they're a publicly traded company, the stock is sold based upon those projections.
Right.
And then if you don't meet those projections, even though you're making more money than you ever made before, you suck.
Right.
Yeah. Which was upside down as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned.
Absolutely.
We would have meetings to discuss the budget, and it wasn't what we were allowed to spend, it was how are we going to generate this much income next year? And they would, there would be all the books, and then they say, well, we'll do, in the summer, we'll do a bunch of annuals. That would boost the bottom line. And then, well, we'll do crossovers. That'll boost the bottom. And then we'd come up in that era with ideas for limited series. So, and those, you do an X-Men or 12 limited series because they were selling like gangbusters.
Yep.
And one of the ones I came up with was I wrote a 4-issue Mephisto limited series, and each issue Mephisto fought a different one of our top groups, the FF and the X Factor, X-Men, and I don't know who else, the Avengers probably, yeah. So, and Mephisto was a great looking character. I never understood how he functioned, which is sad because I was writing it. But I'm the devil incarnate, but I can't do anything unless you really want me to, that kind of thing.
It's comic books.
It's comic books. You take it. If I say it's so, it's so. And it did okay. It did pretty well. In fact, I suggested, and they said, "Oh yeah, Mephisto. Everyone likes Mephisto. Let's do a Mephisto." And then they go, "Well, who will we get to write it?" And nobody said anything. So I said, "Oh, I'll write it. What the hell is my idea? Why not?" So I did, and the idea was, well, this is something we didn't make last year because there was no Mephisto 4-issue miniseries. So that'll help, and we would do this stuff, and but it was frustrating because you could knock it out of the park, you could make 50% more than the previous year, and they'd say just not good enough. Frustrating. And Jim, by the way, was a great guy to act as a buffer between the creative people and the business people. Because the business people, their goal was trying to figure out a way to run the company and not have to pay any of us anything. Can we get rid of? Don't we have enough inventory? Can't we just do nothing but reprints now?
Yeah. So
DC had that.
how does Shooter get the royalty program instituted? I mean, for crying out loud.
Honestly, with that, it was a reaction to DC.
Yeah, it was Paul Levitz's idea to essentially screw Marvel.
Sure.
Because Marvel had 2 books that didn't sell 100,000 a month, and DC had 2 books that did.
Oh.
So the cutoff line was 10,000 comics. If you sold that many, 100,000, I don't know, 10,000, 100,000, you got royalties. And if it was below 100, and if it was 199.99 whatever, you didn't.
Right.
So Paul thought, well, we'll pay royalties on 2 books, but we'll make it look really appealing to the other, to the really top talent who would then come over and work for us. And Shooter called him on it, essentially.
I think also with Hobson's help.
Yeah, well, because.
That's all right. Basically it was, since DC wasn't selling all that well, it wasn't going to cost DC anything. I think Paul, and probably DC, did not think Marvel could match it because it was going to have to cost them. And I will say, right about that same time, I was doing the X-Men Teen Titans book with Chris and Terry, and I had a discussion with Jim, because I figured, look, this book's going to sell a lot of copies. I don't care who's drawing it. Trained monkeys could draw it. We're going to sell a lot of copies. So it'd be kind of cool if we got some royalties out of it. So, and there were no royalties. So Jim explained to us carefully how that wasn't really possible, because if the company had to pay royalties, they were going to go bankrupt, and the company would fold, and we'd all be out of a job.
Oh, yeah, I had the same discussion with Paul Levitz. We were talking at a cocktail party, and I had asked him royalties, and it was the same story. Oh, comics can't afford it, and we'll all be out of a job, and you'll all starve, so we can't give you royalties. And then, but Paul got an idea.
And then, in the time I was doing the X-Men Teen Titans, the royalty program kicked in. And as you can see, the companies went bankrupt. And we're all just living on borrowed money right now that we haven't for the past 30 or 40 years. And but the upshot was that Marvel, in the end, within 3 or 4 days, matched the DC program. Now, the royalties programs have changed a lot over the years. I think each time it's trying to get somebody to not give as much money to freelancers. But basically, we ended up getting royalties on the X-Men Teen Titans book. And that was a nice check.
Yeah.
Which apparently did not bankrupt either Marvel Comics or DC Comics.
Or both.
Or both. So it worked out great. In fact, when that happened, I was doing whatever I went on to Thor shortly thereafter. But my income went up by about 1/3. I'll never get that kind of a raise again.
No.
But when those books were selling, they were selling reasonably well. Even the ones that weren't selling great were still selling over 100,000. I think Doctor Strange was one of the ones that wasn't making that.
I was editing it at the time, and it was Doctor Strange. I had Doctor Strange and the Defenders. They were probably 2 of the lowest, if not the very lowest selling books that Marvel was doing. I'm such a great editor. And I seem to remember them selling in the neighborhood of 130 or 35,000 copies a month, which they would kill for nowadays. And we kept trying to do stuff to, to boost the sales and boost the circulation. It's hard, because if you want to get a top writer on the Defenders, I don't remember, I think it was maybe Mark Damatis, maybe, or I don't remember. He was a very, very good writer, don't get me wrong. And Don Perlin was drawing it. And Don was a good, solid old pro, but not flashy. And if you wanted to make it sell better, so, okay, let's get Chris Claremont and Jim Lee to do it. Well, yeah, and then what happens to the X-Men? So, it was hard to get the talent to, and everybody, all the good artists wanted to draw Doctor Strange, but at the end of the day, if you could do Spider-Man or the Avengers or X-Men or X-Factor, which sold better, you make much more money doing it, and maybe the Defenders or Doctor Strange would come up to the levels. The guys who did that, Jim Starlin, when he took over Captain Marvel, and then took over Adam Warlock, and who was it? Somebody was just there in my brain. Where'd he go? There was somebody. Oh, Frank Miller on Daredevil. That guy. Whatever. I knew him when. So he made Daredevil sell so well that he started getting good royalties. Go ahead.
We're almost out of time. We're probably out of time.
Oh, we are.
But I'm going to sneak this in real quick. One of the reasons I love Frank, Frank and I were office mates for a while, we were studio mates for a while, so I've known Frank a long time. And he was doing Daredevil, same studio, we had Daredevil, American Flag, and Thor coming out the same studio for a while. Howard, me, and Frank, and Jim Sherman was doing other stuff.
I'll have what they're having.
We ended up, Jim would get these ideas occasionally, And he had the idea. Frank was very influenced by Will Eisner, and so he's drawing Daredevil, and it's all city stuff. It's, you know, it's a city, and so it's nighttime, and these pieces like newspapers, are blowing across the streets. You know, they're just in the drawing. And Jim didn't like that. Because he didn't, you couldn't tell what they were. What the hell were these white things in the comic? In the middle of the street or in the air?
Real large snowflakes.
Yeah. So he said...
He had a beef with inset panels, remember inset
Oh,
panels?
yeah.
He thought they were like Post-its, he was always trying to lift them up.
Yep. So he told Frank to quit drawing glowing paper. So Frank did a story, and I will always love Frank for this, no matter what else happens. He did a story where Daredevil was fighting, I think it's fighting Bullseye, I think. And they're fighting in the Canyon of Heroes in New York City in the middle of a ticker tape. And it works great in the story because it screws up Daredevil's radar sense. So it works great. And when he did the credits across the page, at the bottom of the page, and you know, he used to say written by, penciled by, inked by, drawn, lettered by, colored by, editor-in-chief, edited in the editor-in-chief. All of his names are on a little glowing piece of paper at the bottom of the page. And the last one, editor-in-chief, is upside down. So Frank became my hero way before. At that point, I said, damn, that's cold.
But this is a case of Frank Miller pushing against the restriction and coming up with something brilliant.
Really great, no,
And
absolutely.
something that Shooter would love, because he was using.
Well, you knew what the paper was for.
Yeah.
The paper made sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So I don't want to make Jim the villain of tribute to him. So let me point out that he got incentives, which were essentially royalties, because it was good business, and he managed to convince the people upstairs that it was good for their business, and it probably was. And I believe he was pushing for the return of the artwork. Was that during his tenure, I believe?
Yeah.
So, you know, the art, we can't give you back your artwork, you know, or we'll lose the copyright. No, you don't. You have the copyright. We own the physical artwork. What hack lawyers do you have working for you that told you this? And they used to have to sign. There was a release on the back of all the paychecks saying, "This pays me for everything. I own nothing. Marvel owns everything." That's illegal. You can't put conditional things on a paycheck. But the lawyer said, "No, this is good. Then they can't fight us in court." I don't know who was fighting them, but you know, ultimately Steve Gerber, I guess. But you know, so Jim pushed to get the artwork back, and because he felt it was an American tragedy that Siegel and Schuster sold Superman to DC Comics for a pittance, and then ended up getting screwed. Partly their own fault, because they took DC to court over Superboy and I guess Superman as well, after they got, you know, out of the army. But because they had the audacity to sue DC and lose, DC said, and they had a sweetheart deal. I think they were packaging the stuff and getting paid an exceptionally high rate in the 40s. So they would hire people to do all the work, and they just kept the skim the cream off the top, as it were. So, and now these two guys have created arguably the single most important comic book character of all time. Were living, you know, on the brink of poverty. Siegel was still doing a little writing in comics. Schuster was legally blind. He had like real thick eyeglasses. I think he worked for the post office. So he was making a living. But these guys created a multi-billion-dollar property, and they were scraping by on you know, just subsistence wages. And Shooter, well, of course, Neil Adams fought to get them money when the first Superman movie came out, and he did. He got them something, which was nice. But Jim said, I don't want to ever see any of the guys working for me in that position. So he crafted a new character agreement, which would give, if you created characters for Marvel, and they went on to be licensed and sold in any other ways, you would get a percentage of whatever Marvel was getting. So movies, TV shows, cartoon shows, lunchboxes, video games, you name it, you could conceivably make money for the rest of your life and maybe beyond. I don't know what the deal was. And you would not be shut out the way Siegel and Schuster were. And that was, and some people have actually seen a little benefit from that. Although now that Disney had bought the company, they're going around trying to get people to sign a new contract that, you know, gets rid of that. But Shooter was in favor of that, and he pushed for it, and we gotta wrap it up.
That's it.